Hello, Shemai. Welcome to my Wild Welsh Garden. I did promise that I would share with you how I'm making this pond. Now, this didn't set out to be a pond. This was a sort of valley at the bottom of a hill, because these were just flat beds that I was turning into sort of long grassy areas, and I decided to make them more interesting and provide more habitat for creatures by putting some humps and bumps in, some hills and some valleys. Well, this was a valley, and then I looked at it and I thought, you know, that looks like a pond. So I thought, well, why not? Why not have a pond surrounded by meadow? So that's why I'm standing in a hole in the middle of this sort of rather barren area, which will be very different in the summer. Fingers crossed. So, ponds. For wildlife, well, first of all, dig your hole, which I've done here. Now, for a wildlife pond that has frogs, they recommend that it should be sort of at least 60 centimetres deep. Well, this one isn't, so sorry, frogs. And the reason for that is because I've hit clay and I just can't dig it out. It's absolutely solid clay. So this is as deep as it will go. And it is about 45 centimetres deep. So I'm just hoping that's going to be all right. It might not be good for frogs, but it'll be okay for other things. And you need to have, it needs to be level. So the way to do that is to choose where your edges are and put a cane across and then use a spirit level. Which is bang on, so that's nice and level. And I've dug it about 175 centimetres long, so 1 3/4 meters, and not so wide. It's 125, so 1 1/4 meters across. And then you want sort of different levels within the pond, because pond plants need to be at different levels. You have some that need to be in the deep water, and some that are sort of marginals, which are right on the edge, and some that sort of halfway, that like to be under some water, but not very deep water. So that's the purpose of the shelf. There's a shelf round here, which is about I would say 25 centimetres underwater, and that's where some of the pond plants will sit. What else? Oh yes, the other thing is, yes, you need something to line it with. So you need to buy a pond liner, and then something underneath the pond liner which will stop any stones that are in the ground from puncturing it, and obviously it will leak then. So what they say is remove all visible stones. Well, that's not going to happen. I'll show you a bit closer in a minute. But this ground is just full of little stones, because I think it was used by previous occupants of the cottage to dump the sort of the cinders and the embers from their coal fires for many years. So it looks a little bit like a slag heap, to be honest. Yeah, so that's not going to happen. I'm not going to be able to remove all the visible stones, and the underlay that I've got really seems very thin, and I'm sure the pond that I made higher up, it was the underlay was quite thick. It was like sort of felt. But I do have some of the fabric that was under some of the paths. So I'm going to fish that out and use that underneath the new underlay that came with the pond liner. Okay, so that's the plan for that, and that should stop these little sharp stones, of which there are a lot, from puncturing the liner. Okay, so that's the plan. So this is a close-up of the ground, and you can just see it's full of stones. So there's no way I can get rid of all of those. Oh, and I did just forget to say that the slopes out of the pond are variable as well. So on this side, it's quite a steep drop down to the shelf from the edge of the pond, and on this side, there's a nice gentle beach. And the reason for that, I think, is pretty obvious, so that any creatures that do get into the pond or fall into the pond can get out again, and they're not going to drown. Things like hedgehogs and mice and things. And also there's a nice shallow area for creatures to drink from and for birds to bathe in. Now the sun's come up, it's a lovely, lovely day. Blue, blue, blue sky. Fabulous blue. Very bright, clear light this morning. The sun is still very low in the sky. It's still winter. Still a winter sun. It's just come from behind the house. So my little new pond is still in shadow. I've come down here with the sun behind me and just thought I'd catch those lovely cornice in the sunshine. And this is the recycled weed suppressant fabric from under the paths at the top of the garden where I've added more bushes to the hedge. And then the next thing is to put in the underlay, which came with the pond liner. And there it is with the underlay put down with, oh gosh, a lot of overlap around the edge. Yes, it doesn't look very much like a pond at the moment, does it? But the thing is, once you start putting the water in, then that's when it begins to look more like it's supposed to look. Yes, I do have to admit it would have been an awful lot easier if I had another person to help. But there you go. And that's the pond liner down, again with quite a lot of overlap around the edge. They certainly, when they calculate the size of the pond liner that you need for your pond, they certainly are very generous with how much you need, which I guess is in their interest, isn't it? They want to sell as much as they can. I've put a watering can full of water in the middle, but I think I'm going to use the hose, as that will be more gentle. And there's the water trickling gently into the bottom of the pond, and then as it fills up, you just sort of pull on the edges to kind of smooth out all these creases. That's the idea anyway. Obviously, rainwater is best for a pond, but I'm not going to be sort of planting this up very soon, and there's not an awful lot of wildlife around at the moment to colonise it, so I think it will be fine. I'll leave it for at least a week, and any chlorine that there is in the water will have evaporated, and yes, I think that'll be fine. And there it is, filled up. And there it is from the other side, and just about to go into the sun. So what I'll do now is trim the liner around the edges, and this is where it does get a little bit tricky, because I still haven't quite decided how I'm going to manage the edges yet. Because what you normally do is what I've done here, which is to get big stones and rocks and put those around the outside, and then you tuck the liner underneath so you can't see it, and it all looks very aesthetic like this. But I don't want rocks around the new pond. I want to have meadow, and I'm not entirely sure how to how to work it. I've trimmed the edges and just weighted them down with stones temporarily. I've left quite a bit of overlap. The reasoning for that is that I can always trim it some more, but obviously I can't put back what I've cut off. And so I'm going to just leave it for a while I think about what I'm going to do with the edges. And wait, of course, for the chlorine to evaporate, and then I can start putting some pond plants in. And I've just put a few stones up at that end, so if a creature does get into the pond, it can get out again quite easily. This is the pond at the top of my garden, which I made, I think, 5 years ago. Now, as well as trying to decide what to put around the pond, the question is, what do you put in the pond? Well, one thing you can do is to cover the liner with subsoil, and it has to be subsoil because it has to be soil that's not very fertile, because if you have fertile soil in there, then you just get a pond full of algae. The water is too rich with nutrients, so it has to be a nutrient poor sort of substrate, and then you can plant straight into that substrate with your pond plants. But I haven't got any subsoil. Well, I have, but I can't dig it out. So I'm going to put my plants into pots with the special kind of soil that you can get in places that sell pond plants. Yeah, which is what I did here. And then I put a lot of gravel in the bottom, and a lot of things have self-seeded into the gravel, so I don't see why that shouldn't happen again. Now, on the edge here, this is hard rush, and these are in pots. Now, I could take that out and divide it, and then just over there is a iris, and that's also in a pot. So again, I could take that out and divide it, and I don't know whether you can see, but that is a purple loosestrife, the old stems and seed heads. That's in a pot, but it has self-seeded into the gravel over there. So I could pull some of those up quite happily. And then the other problem at this time of year is a lot of the plants have died down. Like there's a water lily in there, and you can't see that. And there's a couple of marsh marigolds, and you can't see those. So I'll have to wait until things have started growing. There's also some mint in there, and something called frog bit, which sort of disappears, sinks to the bottom of the pond in the winter, and then it kind of grows on the surface, a bit like a mini water lily. And so it disappears in winter, and then apparently, I only put it in last year, but apparently it appears again in the spring. So I'll have to wait for that to reappear. But there are some sort of free floating things in here, which I've put into this bowl here. Now I think that this is water forget-me-not, and that's got quite a big root on. So I can transfer that, and I don't know what these are, but there's a lot of them. They're sort of floating around in the pond. Over there, there's a great bunch of them. So I can transfer some of that. And then this is the oxygenator. This is hornwort, and there's a lot of that in the pond. So I can just pull out a few handfuls and transfer that. I'm sorry I'm so vague about the plants that I've got in my existing pond. It was 5 years ago, and I don't really think I took much notice at the time because I wasn't really in a good place and I wasn't really thinking straight. But I think it was one of these wildlife pond starter packs where you get a certain number of plants to match the size of your pond, and you take potluck really. They just send you what they've got in stock. The only thing I would say is that they're all native, so I don't have any non-native pond plants. And I think that's important. If you're going to have a wildlife garden, if you're going to have a wildlife pond in a wildlife garden, then you need to have plants that are native to your country and your area. And just something else to say about the new pond and how I said at the beginning of the video that it's recommended that a pond for frogs is at least 60 centimetres deep. And I think that's because they need that depth to hibernate in. So I'm not going to recommend that frogs hibernate in my new pond, but the pond I have already is a metre deep, so there's plenty of room for them to hibernate in there if they wanted to. And on the subject of frogs in my existing pond, I have some really exciting news. I have frog updates for you. That's always assuming, of course, that you find the whole subject of frogs as exciting as I do. But I'm guessing that if you've got to this stage in this video, then you're just as excited by the prospect of frog news as I am. So that's coming up in the next video. So please stay tuned to the channel and you'll get the updates. So thanks for watching the video. Hope you found it interesting and maybe useful if you're thinking of having a pond. Please like the video if you liked it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Hwyl fawr!